So welcome to Wines of Italy Livestream, which is now turned into a podcast. I'm Katerina, your host from Grapevine Adventures, and today I have Stephanie Quadra as a guest. She's working on a very interesting project in Valle d'Itria with her husband, which we'll learn more about. So welcome, Stephanie, and
Good morning, Katarina. Thank you for
good
having me.
morning. So, would you like to introduce yourself and shortly who you are and
Yes, and then that's always a trick question for me. But in a nutshell, I entered the wine world kind of late in life. This is in 2010, and the reason why I'm even here talking to you today is because in 2010 I was hired to oversee, as someone with a background in journalism, so someone like you, but journalism really with a focus on geopolitics and international relations. I got pulled into the world of wine by the owner of Querciabella and Chianti Classico. He wanted someone from outside of the wine world to basically document what had happened at Querciabella since the mid 80s, mainly in terms of organic and then eventually biodynamic viticulture. And he wanted someone from outside of the wine world to tell that story, because his concern was that all too often when people in our industry, and now I can say it's our industry, talk about wine, it tends to be in a language that is either only approachable to those that already know about wine, or tends to be framed with marketing speech that basically doesn't really distinguish or tell a very unique story.
yeah.
So I got pulled into this world really knowing very little, but in a way it was exciting because it put me in a position where I could just ask questions and interview people and learn and really immerse myself in a culture that I eventually fell completely in love with. So fast forward, I worked with Querciabella for a little over 7 years.
Okay.
And eventually married Roberto Lasorte, who is the CEO of the winery. And that seemed a good time for us to kind of separate our day jobs. At that point, I wanted to remain in the wine industry, and I founded my imports company, wine imports company in the United States, where I'm originally from. That company is called Terrestoria Wine Imports.
Okay.
That's how it kind of started.
Okay. So tell me, well, I mean, everybody knows Querciabella, but if somebody wouldn't know Querciabella, it's this kind of, how do you say, flagship biodynamic winery in Tuscany, in Chianti Classico, that makes, well, biodynamic wines, but they're very well known. So back to you. So if we want to talk about Lasorte Cuadra, which is your new project that came up during the pandemic, as I have understood.
That's right.
Can you tell us a little bit about how that project got started?
It was not planned for in the least. We obviously could not have foreseen the pandemic, but our main family home is in Milan. That's where I am right now. And when the pandemic hit, um, what we ultimately decided to do was to take refuge at the La Sorte family farm in the Valle d'Itria. So
Okay.
in the town, beautiful town of Martina Franca, we're in the province of Taranto, central Puglia. And it was a blessing that we had this place where we could get away from Milan at a time where really life was very difficult. You know, we didn't even know what was happening or what was coming our way. While we were staying down there, we started to think more and more about this family farm that was no longer being cared for by Roberto's parents, who had cared for it very um, for many years. So for over 30 years, they had lived there. They had grown grapes and every kind of fruit, produced olive oil, but with their age, decided to retire and they moved north.
Okay.
So this farm was kind of in a state of abandon. And that's when we looked at each other and said, you know, we're so immersed in this world of wine and in the world of agriculture and viticulture. And here we have little gem right under our noses, and we're not taking care of it. So that's kind of where the light bulb moment happened for us.
Okay. So when you decided that, because I guess you were staying there during most of the pandemic,
Off
as
and
you said,
on, off and on.
it was a very strange time. That today it's still a bit. Some parts I don't really remember well because it was so weird.
Yeah.
So you wanted to kind of take care of the family estate. So what did you decide to do? I mean, you decided to recuperate the vines and
Well, here's the thing. I think initially, especially, I'm speaking for myself, not so much for Roberto, because Roberto was more informed than I was. But I get very excited about things, and I just assumed, well, we can just, pick up where your parents left off, and we can start making wine, and it'll be great. And I didn't realize initially that, first of all, the vineyard that exists on our farm, the cellar where my mother-in-law and father-in-law made wine for over 30 years, they're just for family production, for the consumption of a family. There were no planting rights, and we certainly could not make a commercial wine out of a family cellar. So the first difficulty was figuring out where we even take grapes and press them and make wine.
yeah.
And we initially started literally knocking on doors at local wineries. And the reception was actually very positive, but most often what people were telling us is, we're not a crush pad for, other people. And we basically only have enough room to make wine with, in our facilities for our own wine. Long story short, I was given the name of a gentleman named Angelo Soletti, who is the technical director of UPAL, the Cantina Sociale, the last surviving Cantina Sociale of the Valle d'Itria. And I mentioned that because as recent as the 1990s, there were 8 different cooperatives. That was really the tradition. That was the cornerstone of the economy, of the viticultural economy, which was the economy of the Valle d'Itria, were these cooperatives. I should mention parcels are never much bigger than 7,000 to 8,000 square meters. They're tiny little family-run parcels. People rarely made wine for themselves in their own cellars. They would take the grapes to the Cantine Sociali. And so this cantina in Cisternino, Upal, we went and met with Angelo and told him our story, told him what our wish was to, preserve this, not just the story of Roberto's family who had made wine all these years in this little farm outside of Martina, but we also had this kind of desire to see where these grapes could go. How much more could be done with these grapes that hadn't been done so far? And Angelo immediately, without knowing us, he kind of trusted, or he said, you know what? I've been doing this for over 25 years. Let's do it. This silos, this steel vat, I will allocate to your project. And so for
Great.
the first growing season where we took our grapes and pressed our grapes there, it was 1 silos. It was silos number 147. And I think that just hearing over and over again, your silos, your silos, your silos, the name of the wine revealed itself to us. It wasn't something that we went and looked very far for. It doesn't speak too much to our creativity, but it grew on us. So in essence, the only wine that we produce today is Lasorte Cuadra, is a single vineyard field blend from the Valle d'Itria called Silos.
Okay, so tell me a bit about the grapes, because Verdeca and Bianco d'Alessandro are like grapes that in the last 20 years, I mean, they were always part of the blended wines, but in the last 20 years, they become more kind of recuperated and talked about also in one of our actual versions. So a bit about your thoughts about these grapes that are so connected to the local history in Valle d'Itria.
Yeah, so I hesitate to use the word, now it's kind of a no-no to use the word indigenous grapes because you can never prove where. And the one thing that we can say that we do know is that these grapes are actually of Hellenic origin. But then, maybe we go to Greece and we find out that they came from elsewhere before. So that's kind of a slippery slope. But these are certainly traditional grapes that have been grown and traditional within the Valle d'Itria for centuries, for many generations, to say that, just for starters, and that have adapted very well to the local terrain and to the local terroir. What we are looking to do is not only preserve these local grapes, so primarily Verdeca. Verdeca is always kind of the main protagonist of viticulture and winemaking in the Valle d'Itria. But traditionally, so I'm not talking about modern vineyards that have basically been created in the last 10 to 15 years. Traditionally, wherever you found Verdeca, there was always the presence also of the minor grapes, vitini minori. And so those minor native or local grapes would be the Bianco d'Alessano, which you just mentioned, but also Minutolo, which a lot of people would have heard of, that used to be called Fiano Minutolo, but it's not related to Fiano, so that creates confusion. So now we just call it Minutolo. And the one that's even most obscure, I would say, is Maresco, which you would never call it if you're in Valle d'Itria and talking to the local grape growers. They call it Marugio. The local dialect.
They only did like research on it like 10 years ago in the Turi Institute, I think.
Yeah. So yeah. These are the grapes that you find most likely, and they grow symbiotically. So within our vineyard, it's primarily Verdeca. You can't really say what the composition is. I put it on the label the first year, and then I got reprimanded. You can't officially say it, but I will say it. It just, if you eyeball the vineyard, you could see more or less it's anywhere between 60 to 65% Verdeca, about 10% Bianco d'Alessano. That's the second most important in terms of proportions within the typical field blend. And then the other two, are what they are. They're there, but they all kind of serve a purpose. The field blend, I think, is really the crux of the story of traditional viticulture in Valle d'Itria.
I mean, that's interesting because I went to this seminar in Bergamo about hybrid grapes, and they had also invited a person from Federodort in Piemonte, who is also having a vineyard there. And there was this huge discussion about, because he claimed that they could never use hybrid grapes because they're all monovarietal wines and they can kind of disturb their tradition. And then it got me thinking that I think a lot of the wines in the past, like perhaps even the last 2-3 centuries, I wonder if they actually were monovarietal, because I think a lot of the wines produced in the past were actually just field blends, because a lot of the grapes were grown together.
Well, even in the Valle d'Itria to this day, when you hear a local farmer talking about his wine, he will talk about his wine as if it were just Verdeca or Verdera, as they also call it. And then if you go walking through the vineyards and you say, well, why is that bunch bright gold and yellow and that one is green? And well, those also grow with the Verdeca. That's just a technicality. So I think that is a reflection of what has always existed across, especially in the old world, across Italy and France and Spain in general. And there's going to be more discussion. My feeling is it's going to become more and more relevant, especially in the face of climate change, where we're already seeing, we only have 3 vintages in the bottle, but there were 3 very different vintages. We came out with 3 very different wines year after year, but very balanced wines. And the only answer I can give myself is that it's thanks to that field blend that when one of the grapes suffers or doesn't show its best self given the circumstances of a particular vintage, the other grapes fortunately can step in and compensate. And this in a way is an interesting side story to the topic of sustainability.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I mean, I was going to come into sustainability and I mean, how do you work the vineyards? Are you conventional, or are you in
so
organic, or
as a I have become the marketing person at Lasorte Cuadra, so I'm the one that always has to choose the verbiage, the language that we use when we describe what we do, because to all effects, it is in line with what an organic vineyard, exactly
Yeah,
the way an organic regime would be. I've seen it at Guerchabella. I still see it at Guerchabella. Roberto's the CEO there. Um, the interesting thing to note in the Valle d'Itria is that chemical fertilizers of any kind, synthetic products of any kind, have never even been introduced to the Valle d'Itria. Again, remember, these are tiny parcels. They're gardens. These are where the people live. We have an elevation that we're at 450 meters above
yeah,
sea level. We have a diurnal range, which is super unique for Puglia,
yeah.
especially if
Hopefully, yeah.
you were to compare it to areas that are, in the coastal areas. So really, the idea of intensive farming, conventional farming, was never introduced. It never arrived in the Valle d'Itria. And the sad thing is, before it even arrived, agriculture in general was almost lost. There's this demographic shift that's
Yeah,
happening. So it went from this very old-fashioned agrarian form of society, not just economy. And then suddenly there was this mass exodus of people
yeah,
either going abroad or moving to the north, going to big cities and not coming back. So a lot of this farmland, mainly viticultural land, has been abandoned. And in the interim, the few farmers that have remained are just farming their very small parcels, and they've always worked, and I hate to use the word organically, but
no,
for
I mean it wasn't the right word because I mean in the
no, no,
end,
no, but in our contemporary speech, that is what it is. Meaning,
yeah,
worst
but
case
that's still coming
scenario, they
around.
sporadically will spray a little bit of
Yeah,
copper um, and sulfur, but this is a kind of year where they had to make use of those types of treatments, but they've
yeah.
never used anything that is stronger than that.
No, no, no. But I mean, there's a lot of producers still today who, I mean, they're not organic, but they work in organic even if they're never certified. So
Yeah,
I
you
mean,
just have to
also,
be careful, because the first thing, if you say, well, yeah, it is in effect an organic wine, well, we are not,
no, that's
yeah,
true.
we
Mm,
have no certification to speak of.
mm,
And that would be very difficult, because especially in our area where we're talking about these small family farmers, just the expense, just the administration, the bureaucratic part of getting
no, that
certified
is true.
is not
Yeah,
realistic. It's not realistic.
no, that's true. That's true. Completely true. So how do you see the future of this wine? I mean, what are your next projects regarding the wine?
Well, if you had asked a year ago, I would have said, well, I don't know. We're starting from scratch and we're doing everything. We're very much at the beginning of this, and we still are at the beginning. As I said, we only have 3 vintages in the bottle, but I can say, even since the last time you and I saw each other in Puglia at Radici del Sud, we're now exporting to Germany. We have a great importer in Germany. Through my importation company in the United States, we just entered the California market, which I'm excited about because that's where I'm from originally,
Okay.
specifically in the Los Angeles area. And just this week, it looks like we're going to be entering the Dutch market very soon.
Okay.
So, we only make 7,000 bottles, Katarina, you know this.
Yeah.
So, the production is so limited that we kind of have to, I'm not saying pick and choose, because if somebody wants our wine, we are humbled and honored to give it to
Well,
them.
selectively distribute, I guess.
But it is what it is. So
Yeah.
basically half of the production. So we're talking about, and I would say more on average, it's about 6,500 about. Last year, we were able to produce 7,500 bottles, half of which went straight to the United States.
Mm.
This year, our production, or I should say last year, the 2022 vintage, what we did, we set aside the equivalent of 1,000 bottles of wine. And right now, what we're doing is producing an artisanal vermouth using the botanicals of the Valle d'Itria. So we're really excited. That's going to be an added layer to the project. We will be exhibiting at Micro Mega Wines at VinItaly. So I'll bring the new vintage, which will be released then. The 2022 will be released. The Silos 2022 will be released in April alongside the Vermouth, which will be kind of our world launch at VinItaly. I mean, we're excited about that.
So if you would look on the three vintages that you have made so far, how would you say that they distinguishes between them? I mean, what's the differences in vintages?
Yeah, well, I think I don't know if you remember when we tasted together back in June. We took the 2020, which was the first vintage, and the 2021. And I like to call the 2020, but I like the 2020 a lot. It's a more difficult vintage probably for a lot of people to understand, especially if they're not familiar with these grapes. We should mention that these are, for the most part, non-aromatic grapes. So already our contemporary palate doesn't know how to approach this type of wine. The 2020 was a cold and wet vintage, and it was followed by a hot, dry vintage, which was the 2021. So already we would expect the wines to be super different. One of the things that the way we categorize the personality of the two wines, one is the intellectual, and you have to really have patience with that particular wine and know how to pair it and give it time. But when you do that, when all of those prerequisites are in place, and I understand that's not easy, it gives a lot. It's a surprising wine. It's a wine that transforms itself, which I think what makes it so special. And it's also the reason why it's performing really well in high level restaurants where there's someone behind the scenes that has already figured out how to pair it and likes to present it as part of a tasting menu. That's the 2020. So it's a demanding wine in many ways, but it's also very generous to you when you know how to present it and you know how to pair it and all of that. The 2021 is a much easier vintage because of the heat, because of the dryness. I remember when we picked the grapes were half the size of what they were in 2020. So they were just really concentrated, much sweeter. So in many ways, it's just more, ruffiano, as the Italians and the Tuscans say. It's more approachable. It still has the identity. What I like about the two wines is that you definitely recognize that they are at least relatives to each other. They have, especially in the nose, you recognize the varietal expression. But the 2021, it's, I can't deny, is just a lot. There's a sweetness, a perceived sweetness to it that you would never find in the 2020. And I understand that in the market, commercially speaking, I've already seen it because I'm working with both vintages side by side. It's interesting that there's certain, for instance, the distributor that I'm working with in Los Angeles picked up both vintages. I gave them the option to go with one or the other. And I'm from LA, so I can not sound like I'm, bad mouthing people from Los Angeles, but I assumed that 2021 would be the only vintage for Los Angeles. And I was wrong. And I was I was really, really happy when the distributor said, no, there's a time and a place for each. So we're going to take both, and we know, where to take each, or to give our customers the option of. And what we're finding in a lot of restaurants is that they're working with both vintages at the same time, knowing that even the pairing.
That's understandable. I mean, there's different type of clientele, I guess. So
exactly.
Also different kinds of food that you can pair it with. So
so it's nice to see that there are people that are willing to take the time, because that I do understand. It's more of an effort. These are wines. This is a wine that requires a hand sell, because we've got three things going against us. An appellation that very few people, Valle d'Itria.
No, nobody knows Valle d'Itria.
No one knows. Then we have grapes that few people have heard of, and certainly a brand, Lasorte Cuadra, that I can guarantee no one has heard of. So we've got those three, strikes against us. So the only option, and so far I've been so honored to see that there are people that are buying into it and saying, no, I will be your ambassador. And because that's what it takes. It takes, a
Yeah, no,
human being to say this
that is
bottle is
true.
worth trying.
Mm.
So that's where we're at right now.
Well, that's nice. So, how would you, I mean, how did you see, if we talk about the last few, about the challenges in general? I mean, now you said you have three penalties against you, which is the area, the grapes, and
Brand
the
name.
brand name. But I mean, the main challenges while kind of recuperating and doing this project, and also the main rewards. I mean the rewards, I guess, is that people actually likes and wants to buy your wines. But if you would have something particular also in the rewards section to say about this project so far.
Well, I think the reward is already what motivated us in the first place, and it's the aspect of social sustainability. We
Mm,
see an agrarian way of life in the Valle d'Itria that I certainly never saw. This is where Roberto's on his paternal side, where his family comes from, where he used to spend his summers and remembers a sea of vines and every patch of land was being cared for. And now, unfortunately, most of that land is now just sitting in a state of abandon. And so it's not just the land, it's not just the grapes, it's not just the wine that's no longer being made. It's those families, it's that societal structure that is no longer there.
yeah.
So part of our project, as Roberto and I kid about, at least for the time being, we continue to kid. We said we're never going to make money off of this. This is not our objective. It's the fact that we're able to contribute in a very small way to that way of life in the Valle d'Itria. And I have to say, local people are responding really positive. I can, give you an example. This year, the vineyard where our grapes come from, I would say we lost over maybe 85% of the production. Gone. It
Yeah.
never actually, there were no grapes. When you walk through the vineyard, it looked as if it had already been harvested. That's where we were at. And Donato Librano, who is the vignaiolo that looks after our vineyard, he said, I already have a solution. Basically he went and called all the members of his family that all have their own little plots, the same size, and they all contributed a part of their harvest so we could fill our silos.
Oh my
Uh,
God, that's really kind of
no, and that was not
collaborative
something
spirit.
that we expected. It wasn't something that we asked. It wasn't, and they all came and they were so proud and they said, no, you need to fill your silos because that's, you have to, you can't stop making this wine. And what's interesting is all these vineyards that are part of this family, they're all basically selection from each other. So they're the same,
Yeah.
even the grapes are related to each other. It's not just the grape growers and the farmers that are related to one another. But it was so moving that in a year like this, so when I talk about sustainability, and in one regard, it's also environmental
Yeah.
sustainability, because in a vintage as difficult and as devastating, not difficult, absolutely devastating as this year, that a community would step in and on our behalf without us even asking, that showed us that that little idea that we had to preserve that type of community, it's starting to respond to us in this way. So
Yeah.
it's easier for me to give you an example, an illustration
No,
of what
no,
we
but I
wanted.
totally agree because I had this story or a similar story with another producer too, who kind of found this old vineyard next to his own, and it was kind of it's kind of cared for by this old couple in their 80s, but they still go every day in the vineyard. And I mean, he doesn't pay them. I think they give him part of their grapes, but
Exactly.
they still every day go there, and they're just happy that he takes care of it. And well, I don't know the deal between them, but I mean, it's a great story, and you see them like you know Of course, he takes photos of them in the vineyard because it's a great story. But I mean, they go there every day and they care for the grapes as if they were their own children. So
Yeah,
it's
well, exactly. So that's exactly where we're, and unfortunately, that is being lost. And so one
yeah,
of the things that meant a lot to Roberto, because like I said, he saw it. He saw it when that type of society was thriving in when he
yeah,
was a child, and to be able to preserve at least a small part. And I'll tell you an interesting benefit that we certainly couldn't have foreseen is that we're starting to see this new generation that probably wasn't really interested in going back because it's seen almost like a failure to, we've
yeah,
progressed, we've gone beyond being farmers,
yeah.
we're CPAs and we're lawyers and we're professionals in the city. Well, guess what? They're starting to come back and
Come
see
back. Yeah,
that there's something actually very dignified and very, very important. And it would be a travesty to
yeah,
let that go. And I think, the fact that we were able to salvage even Roberto's family's small farm. My father-in-law, who is no longer with us, he decided at one point to sell the farm because he didn't want to leave a burden on his children. And so when we stepped in and said it's not a burden, but we will purchase it, and that way,
yeah.
it's clear and everything is taken care of. Had we not stepped in, we would have been one of those examples of just letting something go. And once it's gone, it's very hard
Yeah,
to reclaim.
that is true. That is true. No, I mean, you're completely right. I think in the last decade or so or two, I mean, there's a clear tendency. I mean, I think that's also part of the recuperating the grape varieties, or not recuperating, but returning to talk about them and what they mean to the local.
And to give them their due place, because the
Yeah.
other thing I know I've talked about with you off camera is, initially at the very beginning of this project, a lot of very well-meaning people wanted to give us advice, and we're suggesting that we help our grapes by adding a little Chardonnay, a little Sauvignon, just in a small amount, just to help them, to make them more approachable to the outside world.
Yeah.
And we were very hard-headed about it, and we said, you know what? Let's see how far we can go with our grapes. And
Yeah.
I'm not even bad-mouthing that practice, because I understand the purpose. I just gave you the example of the 2020 and
No, no,
2021
that's
vintage. That
true.
2021 vintage, it doesn't have any Chardonnay in it, but because of the heat, that Minutolo, which is the only aromatic variety in the bunch, really stands out. So it makes the wine easier and more,
Yeah.
it's more of a crowd pleaser, in other words.
Mm.
We refuse to do that. That's one of the things, that's another important thing, is not just using the grapes, but allowing the grapes to tell their own story, to
Yeah.
have their own place, and in this whole world of Italian fine wine. And we honestly, how could we ever know what their potential would be without giving them that opportunity to speak for themselves, without, any other blending partners that might help them?
No, I think that's a great thing. I mean, I think also the smaller, I mean, other smaller producers just like you are trying to kind of lift up these grapes now. I think
Yeah.
it's important work, because I mean, still today, if you ask people from abroad what white wine they have tasted from Puglia, in a lot of cases they talk about a Chardonnay by a producer I will not mention, because I don't want to mention any other producers, not because. And I find it very weird that, it was like, I tasted this great Chardonnay from Puglia. And it's like, why would you go to Puglia and drink Chardonnay when there are, like, so many great indigenous grape varieties? But then I can understand, because, it's easy to find, and it's also, of course, particular to have a Chardonnay from Puglia. But so I think it's very admirable, and also a great project to kind of really give value to the local grapes, not because they're only local, but because they're part of this society,
Correct. Exactly.
the agricultural society that kind of almost got lost,
Hmm.
as you said before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So if the people wants to find you, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, I think the easiest I'm always on Instagram. Lasorte Cuadra is on Instagram, so that's one easy route. Certainly through the website, certainly by email. The email is simple: vino@lasortecuadra.com. I have to remind people that, especially Italians, Quadra is spelled with a C. My last name is Spanish, not Italian. It's always written with a Q.
Yeah.
My father said it many years ago. We should just change the spelling, would make everybody's life much easier. But it's Lasorte Cuadra with a C. So vino@lasortecuadra.com. It's basically me. So if they want to get in touch with us, by all means, feel free to send us an email.
Okay, so anything you want to add before we end this interesting conversation that you think the listeners should know about Lasorte Cuadra?
Well, we're still a work in progress. And there's a lot of moving parts right now. I welcome any opportunity when we're out there. That's why I invite people to follow our Instagram, because I when things pop up, even at the last minute, and we get invited to, exhibit at a small artisanal wine tasting or any kind of event, whether it's here in Italy or in Europe or even in the United States, I put it out there because the one thing that we enjoy the most is to meet people in person and get people to taste this wine, because we can talk about this wine, but it's so peculiar. These grapes, not just our wine, but these particular varieties are so peculiar that, yes, it's nice to hear the story. And I thank you for this opportunity to share it with an audience that obviously hasn't heard about us yet. But the best thing that we can do is have the opportunity to pour the wine and to share it with people in person. So definitely stay up to date, either through our website or through the Instagram. The main event for us, the biggest opportunity for us, will be the next VinItaly. We didn't exhibit last year, so VinItaly 2024 is going to be a big deal for us. To have our own little stand at Micro Mega Wine. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Oh, that's great. So everybody who is going to be at VinItaly should definitely go and taste Lasorte Cuadra Silos.
Yes,
I can highly recommend it. So thank you very much for this chat, and that you took the time to be interviewed by me. I'm very happy about that. So thank you very much, Stephanie, and thank you everyone who has listened in. And until next time.
Thank you, Katarina. We'll see you soon. Ciao.